Well, welcome everybody to this afternoon session on our second day of our conference. It's a real pleasure for me to introduce Joel Mark Witt and Antonia Dodge, also known, of course, as Personality Hacker. They are podcasters, entrepreneurs, personal development coaches, and experts in personality typology. And they've consulted with companies like Zappos, Oracle, Amazon, American Express, CNN, and many others. I know they do fantastic work bringing type to younger generations, and I'm delighted that they're going to talk today about how to bring cutting-edge AI innovations into our use of type while still keeping the irreplaceable human touch. So over to you, Antonia and Joel.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you to BAPT and everyone that put this conference together, inviting us to be here. We really are excited to talk with you today and be part of this experience. Catherine was telling me just how BAPT, there's some growth happening around BAPT, post-COVID and all this, and there's a live event coming this summer that's really exciting. So we just want to send our good intentions, our blessing to that. I think it's awesome that this community keeps growing and there's more connection than ever. That's awesome. So thank you so much for having us here. I had ENFP preferences, and Tony has ENTP preferences. I found myself, talking about bringing things to younger generations. We found ourselves in a very interesting place recently this past week. We were near Washington, D.C., in an audience, a giant theater, the Bethesda Theater down there in Bethesda, Maryland, right outside Washington. And we looked around the room. I'm 45 years old, and Tony is 46, and we were the youngest people in this entire audience. It was because we were attending a concert. It was a 50th anniversary concert for a gentleman by the name of Garrison Keillor and his radio show, A Prairie Home Companion, which was a program that back in the 1990s, when I was a teenager, I heard on the radio one day on our national public radio here in the United States, and I was like, what is this old-timey radio thing going on? And it's ENFP preferences. I'm into kind of weird asynchronous things, I guess, or anachronistic things in my life. So I kind of became a fan of this. Fast forward many years, this gentleman now, Garrison Keillor, is 81 years old, and he's doing this final tour with this radio show, kind of old-timey experience. So I drag Antonia to this. I'm like, you got to come with me. This is my thing, right? So she comes down graciously with me. And we're in this room, and at intermission, Garrison Keillor at 81 is on stage, and he says, you know what, I'm going to stay during the intermission part. I want to sing some songs with people here in this audience. And he started to sing some old church hymns from his childhood and some Americana songs and some general, just general Irish singing songs, just a couple songs, a lot, Old Lang Syne type stuff or whatever, like all these songs that culturally people were all attuned to in the same fashion. And I remember thinking two important thoughts that day, like the other night on the experience. I was looking at a man who got a pretty cool experience of, sometimes we start things creatively, but we never get the point where we go on the final tour and we get to kind of wrap it up at the end. I thought, wow, that is a really interesting experience this man's having. He's able to have an art or expression or something he's doing his whole life, and he gets to have like a final moment of recognition. You can see he was up there soaking up because there's only a few performances left. There's going to be a few more cities, soaking up this experience in the moment. So I was really tuned into that. And then the next thing I was tuned into is just how connected the culture was in the room. Everyone knew the same songs. Everyone knew the same phrases. Everyone knew, they were kind of tuned into the same cultural moment. And I was realizing that this might be some of the last vestiges of everyone being on the same page in the way that they were in that room. It was a very magical moment of something that I think is going to be changing into the future as technology moves. I don't think it has to be terribly sad. I think something is, maybe wrapping up its tour of experience, much like Garrison Keillor on the front of that stage was wrapping up kind of his experience, and that was the end of his career, his art. I think in a way our culture is going through a shift as well, and we're wrapping some things up. And I think the advent of artificial intelligence and some of the tools of the future that are on the scene are going to be ushering that transition. But there's a big key here in that we can't lose the humanity in all of it. And I think that's what Antonia and I want to come and talk with you about today, is we believe that people, a part of this community and communities like it in type and other personal growth tools and models that really pay attention to how these things influence us, we think that we play an important role of stewardship and vision and attention and attunement as we make this transition. I think there's a way that all of us can be involved wise movement forward. So that's what we want to approach today in our talk.
All right. So I don't know if you've read the description of our talk, but I will give an example. I'm sure a lot of you just came from Dario's talk. And my guess is that he packed it full of like suggestions and tools and ways to use AI and large language models in order to get the most out of them. But let me show you how I used AI in the very recent past. I'm Antonia Dodge from Personality Hacker. I'm speaking at the British Association of Psychological Type on the topic of balancing cutting-edge AI innovation with the human touch, an evolving landscape of personality typology. I just realized that our friend and colleague, Dr. Dario Nardi, as a keynote speaker, is presenting on essentially the same subject and is the talk directly before ours. I need a new talk outline ASAP. I don't want to say how recent that recent past was, but I got up very early this morning. All right, I'm on East Coast time in the United States. So, and why is that the case? Well, because I have introverted sensing as an inferior function. I just don't pay attention to the details. So when Joel says that we're going to talk about the human touch, it's in part because we were going to talk about the bridging of these two things. And why don't we just get to the bridge part? Because I'm sure you just got saturated with a bunch of AI great tools and suggestions. So we're going to talk about that human touch piece because it's crucial to not lose. As Joel mentioned, there's this human component, and there can be some concern and worry about where we're going into the future, what the direction of the technology will do, and I think that there are opportunities and dangers or potential challenges woven into this next frontier of humanity that we're moving into. So one of the reasons why we all have it on our mind is Dario actually teaches our Tools of the Future program that guides students into how to use EEG machine technology, how to use AI technology. And we've all been kind of talking about it. So it makes sense that it's been on our consciousness and why we'd all be talking about it. But we want to, as I mentioned, we want to bridge over to the human component pretty quickly because we feel, and this is actually at the beginning, we put this at the beginning of our book. We wrote a book in 2018-ish, that humanity is having a bit of an identity crisis. It's because we don't have that more modernist feel that Joel was talking about, because we're not all sort of on the same page culturally, because everything is so fractured and hyper-personalized to us. Like, and this started with social media. We're starting to sort of lose our identities through social media. And now AI is going to bring in this new wave of adding to this collective identity crisis.
Yeah. So think about this moment. If a technology can come and do the jobs that most people can do, and we don't know the timeline of this, but eventually technology is going to be able to do a lot of things that we humans do. Someone was sharing with me, there used to be people in New York City, I'm guessing London probably as well, that were young boys would be hired. They were called knockers, I think. They would be hired to use these sticks to knock on people's windows in the late 19th century in order to wake them up in the mornings, like an alarm clock service, basically, for people that lived in the city. We don't need that anymore because technology has replaced that. We don't need to hire people to do that job anymore, right? So imagine a world where that kind of happens very fast, and a lot of people then all of a sudden have an experience, and it may not even be a challenge of resource, or we might as humanity be able to figure out how to take care of ourselves, feed ourselves, and have the resource we need to survive. It actually may not throw us into a crisis of that, as technology kind of does this. I actually imagine more, we're going to have our basic needs covered. We're going to be able to move through the world and have the food we need and the resource we need. There's some challenges there. But I think the bigger challenge is when people stop identifying themselves by the roles they perform in life. This idea of a role-person merger is the idea of that I am what I perform. I am a professor. I am a accountant. I am a typologist or a coach, or fill in the blank of whatever that might be. And I'm not saying all that's going to go away, but what happens if people don't have the same roles they once had? We believe it's going to be a little bit of a crisis of identity. Well, who am I, or how should I think about my life if I don't have the things that make me me and all the things that I know to do? What does that look like? How can I approach that in a wise way? So I think it's a big question that a lot of people are going to be facing, probably in a relatively short timeline. We don't know, and this is all speculation on this, but we do think it's going to create a little bit of a vacuum and a little bit of an opportunity for type to enter here.
Yeah, type can very easily become something that fills that vacuum. And in fact, it sort of has. You can see this, that people are now using these tools or using personality type as one of the things that they present to others. Like part of, you've got your Twitter or X handle, and you've got your flags next to it that indicate the things that you're aligned with. And then you've got your personality type, your Myers-Briggs personality type in your bio. And this is all
type.
right. Exactly. It's kind of all part of your identity, these little tags, these little sort of pieces of your identity. And so we're already seeing type being used this way as one of the things that fills the vacuum. Now, when a huge vacuum of identity comes, it provides an extraordinary opportunity for a tool like type, Myers-Briggs, to explode, to become huge. And it's already gaining global ground. I mean, there are other countries that are taking to it like crazy. Pop artists are putting it in their songs, and it's becoming a thing. And so that's an amazing opportunity that type has to spread and grow, which is, has been sort of the dream of a lot of people who have been familiar with type for a long time. But just like with AI, how we use the tools will influence its ability to be a force for good, as envisioned by the original creators, or it could simply plug the dike of identity, right? We can either have it as a stopgap, like a small thing, where it doesn't have the power that it could potentially have, or how we use them, and particularly people who have been enthusiasts for a long time, people who are usually those that introduce the concept to others. We have an opportunity to use this time period to have the power that was the original intent, that was baked into the original intent of the system. So we're in an interesting time period right now, where AI will create capacity so that maybe for the first time ever, computers will meet us for the first time in functionality. They'll be coming to us in functionality, right? And how we do things. But in order to get them to do that, we're going to have to meet them in thinking. So these large language models, AI, ChatGPT-4 being one of the best examples, or one of the most common examples anyway, in order to get the results we're looking for, we have to think like it needs us to think to get the prompt, or to put the prompt in to get the result we're looking for. So while it might match our functionality, we're going to have to match its thinking.
Yeah. So what this looks like, let's think of an example here, hypothetically. The one thing about technology we all know is that we have to come and meet that technology where it's at. So if I want to text my friends or talk to somebody, I have to pick up a phone and I have to clunkily type words in or speak into it to get this to do what I want it to do, to communicate, to bring me the information I need. Well, what artificial intelligence is going to do is it's going to make that interfacing irrelevant. Technology is going to eventually, in a very, again, short timeline, fade into our background and be surrounding us. We'll be immersed in it. It will be part of our experience, not something we go to perform. And I think that's a really big shift in people's mindsets. That's when we say it will meet us in functionality, meaning it's, from anything to where room lights will turn on as we move through rooms. That's an easy one to grasp. But also information is going to be so readily available, almost instantaneous. And they have technology now where they might even have ability for our bodies or minds to interface with it directly. But just imagine everything in your world is kind of seamlessly happening because the technology has just faded into the fabric of how you exist. It's no longer as clunky to have to go and type something in and then send it, and someone has to get it and then, pull it out and receive it. Almost like how email replaced letters in the post, where you would actually write a letter and you'd stamp it and you'd mail it. Well, technology we don't have to do that anymore. We still have the mechanism, but we don't have to do that. And it means that we can communicate much faster. It just kind of faded into the background, the communication through email and text and all these. Well, one more step further is this technology will come onto our terms, and it will also meet us in a very customized and personal way, meaning everybody's experience is going to be tailored to what their preferences are, how they want to experience the world, right? Now, right now, though, we're still in a way where we have to have interface and we have to clunkily put things into. And what's happening in that is humans that want to benefit from this technology, we have to think, well, if I want the benefit from this tool, the cost or the mechanism that I do is how I ask it a good question. The better the question I ask this technology, the better the answer I get. And so right now, we're learning as humans to get really good at asking questions that can almost These tools, they're called large language models. I'm sure Dario covered some of his talk and maybe the technical aspects of it. But these tools, basically, it's what you how you prompt it or ask it or attune it is the type of result you will receive from it. So what's happening are people's minds are needing, or they're already in the process of shifting on how we think about things. And we're not really paying attention to how that's shifting, but we're definitely shifting. We're already, and maybe not everyone here, because this is very new. So some people that are early adopters that are very eager to participate, myself included, I'm actually thinking about the world differently. I'm thinking about information differently. I'm thinking about the nature of questions and answers differently, just for the last several months of using some of these tools in a casual way, like not even in like a superpower user way. In a casual way, it's already shaping how I see things and how I ask questions.
Yeah, an example of this is that there was a recent and brief study done on people who regularly use large language models like ChatGPT-4, and they're actually increasing in politeness. The people who use like AI, they increase in politeness because the large language models themselves are polite. And so because they're so polite, thank you, please, it's encouraging the users to become more polite in their day-to-day interactions. It's a very subtle example of how engaging with this technology on a regular basis is already impacting how people engage with the rest of the world. And so if it's encouraging people to be more polite, it's also, as Joel mentioned, going to encourage a different style of thinking in order to engage with it and, again, ask a better question or prompt it in a better way, or in a way that it can give us the best answers.
Yeah.
And it works on something called tokenization. So AI works on tokenization, which is breaking apart words and concepts and pieces in order to understand it and then pattern like the next piece. So tokenization is effectively taking something that's a more broad abstract thing and then breaking it down to essential parts. And while we don't have to necessarily think specifically in tokenization, we don't have to give it little, pieces of words or pieces of concepts, because it works that way so much, it can start to output things that are reliant on that style, right? Is to break things down to more simple things. And so we become more reliant on it in order to some extent, do our thinking for us, our thought labor for us. And it can lead to a more tokenized way of seeing things, meaning like breaking them down into their essentials. For example, taking that 4-letter code and making it the whole sum of your identity. That would be tokenizing your identity into a single 4-letter code. And so it might start to encourage people to have more tokenized ways of seeing everything. Now, identity cannot be tokenized. In fact, identity is an ever emergent thing. It's something that we get to spend an entire lifetime discovering about ourselves. And that was the original intent of the creators, originally Carl Jung and then Isabel and Catherine, this idea of a lifelong discovery of self, using this as an access point. Unfortunately, Myers-Briggs suffers from its own success as a model. So Robert Anton Wilson, who's one of my favorite thought leaders, at one point said about models, the best models are useful when pared down to their essentials, but also can be studied indefinitely. And Myers-Briggs, I think, qualifies as an extremely useful model, as one of the best models, because it is useful when it's pared down to its essentials. In fact, it's so useful that a lot of people don't think they have to go any further, that they've got everything they need just when pared down to the essentials. But it is one of the best models. And so because of that, it can be expanded upon indefinitely, which is what it should be. It should be expanded on indefinitely because we're expanding on ourselves indefinitely. Our relationship to the model, how the model helps us understand more and more of our identity. Just over the last, I learned to type when I was 14 years old. And as Joel mentioned at the beginning of this, I'm now 46. So it's been over 30 years that I've been aware of type, and my relationship to type at 14 is unrecognizable from my relationship to type now, because I'm using the model differently based on where I'm at in my life. And so I get to expand upon it indefinitely. I get to understand different angles of it, different facets of it, because I understand myself in different angles and facets. And because I've built such a strong relationship to it, not only do I understand it differently and engage with it differently, but it's helped me understand myself more. Like, we've influenced each other. I've influenced the model and my relationship to it, and the model has influenced me. And that's expanding upon things indefinitely, which is an opportunity that the model gives. But if we start allowing ourselves to think in terms of tokenization, then we never get to see that extremely fleshed out sort of substrate underneath all of it, the depth of it, the ability to use it as not just a psychological tool of the mind, but also, since it has its roots in a very spiritual place, a place that talks about whole self, a place that talks about the concepts of individuation, which is making sure that we don't basically waste the time on the planet by getting a little too into our own egos. It has a spiritual aspect, an aspect of transcendence, an aspect of being able to find our whole self in the universe. And so it can not only be a tool of the mind, but it can also be, well, we call it a psycho-spiritual tool, a tool of the mind and the spirit, which is something that can't be understood through tokenization. So then how do we, as people who are, you could call us irrationally passionate about type. All right, we have an irrational passion about this subject. And not everybody into type has an irrational passion. In fact, they have usually a very sort of a passing fancy, or something that's sort of intriguing, or a way that it can maybe help out. But those of us with an irrational passion, which means that we're not going to stick with just the basics, we're going to go deeper as much as we possibly can. How do those of us with an irrational passion help encourage others to not tokenize type, to not just see it as a 4-letter code that you put next to a flag of, of support, that it's something that truly doesn't just plug the dike of identity in this identity crisis that we're collectively having as a society, but something that can actually be nourishing, something that can allow type to be an actual spiritual tool as well as a psychological tool of the mind.
Yeah. So we want to, in just a moment here, love to open up some broader discussion or questions, because I think that, clearly these are ideas we have that we're positing, that other people might have some other perspectives to add into that, or questions to help shape the thinking around it. Here's when Antonia talks about tokenization, it's a concept that's like, it can be very abstract, but one way to think about it is like labels or stereotype labels, right? I think I have noticed that younger people, because we attract audiences of all ages, and when we see younger people often over nominalizing or over defining terms, for example, there's this thing, for example, on the internet, I'll say, narcissist. The word narcissist has almost become something that is no longer the original meaning of what it once was. It's been reduced to a label that people this is what Antonia's meaning by tokenization. It means a whole thing, almost like not a weaponization of information, but in a very it has a very particular meaning when someone's that person's a narcissist, or you're just being narcissist. It's not a therapeutic or technical way of talking about it. It's a very labeled way of talking about it. It's a tokened way. It's almost like you took the concept and you forged an actual coin, and it represents this thing that it never really represents. It's not full in its definition. And it almost becomes a currency of culture, a currency. That's the word token can be, something that's captured value, but it also can be traded. And I think it's because because it can be traded in a concept or an idea, these labels, and because computer systems understand that, it's in code, it needs labels to operate, it needs pieces of code to operate. The thinking that we have is, that could be a really dangerous merging of ideas. If we're already as humans, before artificial intelligence comes and needs our thinking to be kind of in these ways that it can capture so it can be traded around and manipulated fast with computer systems, well, the same thinking that might lead to that being efficient, we're already seeing kind of in the way people socially behave by labeling each other or themselves in a insufficient and without fidelity. Those two things coming, it's like there needs to be something that's going to be the antidote to that. And so our work that we've been focusing on is we are believing that anytime you have something that's a wisdom, and this has been a secret of the spiritual wisdoms of the ancients, they understand that it needs to be codified in narrative and experience and embodiment. And so any truth or wisdom or spiritual discipline that has its more pure expression, it's hard to tokenize those things. And the moment we do, we start to bring them into actual symbols or you take like something just from my faith background that was an experience of, Jesus and his disciples with wine and bread. By the time it gets to me, it's tokenized in that I've got a little plastic cup in church filled with grape juice and a little wafer, a little plastic wafer that you have. It's been brought to that level because then it can be mass distributed, right? In a way, in a religious context, where that's not a very earthy, that wasn't as dynamic or as visceral as the moment that it's representing. It's a representation. It's no longer the thing. And that's what we're talking about with tokenization. It's the representation. And what happens in a world where information moves so quickly and it's been captured in these ways that it feels useful? Oh, the functions, introverted thinking, and it's been tokenized, let's say, and we talk about it as if it's just this one thing that's almost tradable, like a trading card or a coin. We're losing all the things that can't be brought down to that level, just like with communion, like now, from thousands of years ago. It's a similar concept. And so I think what we're saying is that in all of this, the thing that we can be mindful of is to not over cerebralize or make it all up here in the abstract. The work we do with our clients and our students and ourselves and our lives is to bring all this knowledge that we love, and we bring it in-house and we see it change ourselves. We use it to therapeutically and self-coach ourselves and others and get coaching and help. And we see it transform us, and we make it part of how we move through the world, the operating system of our lives in a way, the way that we engage. And we believe that that is what the type community has the opportunity for more than anyone else, because other people are introduced in more of a function of it. Like, oh, it helps me understand my coworkers, and they're using it functionally. But people that are truly deeply involved or invested or investigating all the aspects of this, people that are here at BAPT and other conferences like it, we believe have a very unique opportunity to embody this more and be a representation in themselves of this knowledge, almost like ancient wisdom, which I believe it's tuning into. I think Jung was tied into something that was much, much more ancient than himself. He was discovering something, not inventing something. That's my personal belief. And I think he just brought it to us and helped us understand it and brought language and experience to it. I think those things can be embodied and be carried on in how we behave and how we become. That sounds abstract. That sounds pretty big, but I think people here understand what I mean by it, because it's probably influenced your life in some way. You've experientially changed your behavior or altered the course of something in your life, maybe your life itself, based on understanding more about how you're wired, how you learn information, how you make decisions. And it was probably pretty powerful. That's probably why you're still interested. Or you've also seen it, or you've also seen it in other people's lives and the changes they've made too. So I think that's where the thinking here, we have an opportunity before this AI revolution starts going 1,000,000 miles an hour. I think those of us that care about these things, that have seen it transform, we take a moment and we say, okay, what does it mean to really understand this in a visceral, embodied way? And I think that's going to be the thing that gets us through in the transition that's coming.
Yeah. There's a model called DIKW that I see pop up in systems thinking here and there. I don't remember the original point or the original place that I got the model, but DIKW stands for data, information, knowledge, and wisdom. And it's a way of recognizing sort of like the content that you're working with. What level is the content at? And how should you be engaging with this content? So data is basically like what we're talking about. It's like bits of information. It's like pieces of it. The easiest way to understand is like ones and zeros of binary code. Like that's data. When data gets organized into a thought, it becomes information now. So it's not just little pieces of data, right? Like little pieces of content. It's now
the alphabet could be seen as this. That's
right.
Data. The letter T is a piece of data.
Right, exactly. But words, right? When you take the alphabet and put them into words and sentences and concepts, now we have information. When we take that information and apply it in reality, right? We don't just understand it conceptually, but we start to apply it. Now it turns into knowledge. Right now you have an experiential relationship to this, and so it's not just, it's that old phrase. It's knowing that tomato is a fruit, but knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. So that's knowledge. Okay, so I know that tomatoes are a fruit, but when I put it in the fruit salad, that didn't work out so well. So that's what knowledge gives us. And then over time, if we apply our information enough, what knowledge gives birth to is wisdom. And wisdom tells us when this knowledge is not the right tool for the job. It tells us when the rules are broken. It tells us the best applications and the best practices of how to use this thing. And so, as I mentioned before, most people here, most likely, have what is called an irrational passion about type. And we just can't get enough, right? We just keep consuming content around it because we are irrationally passionate about it. And those of us who are irrationally passionate have the best opportunity as type enthusiasts and maybe even type influencers, people who create content around it, or type professionals, people who do this in their work and their vocation, we're on the best footing to keep the humanity of the wisdom of type at the forefront of people's minds. The wisdom being, here's where type is the best tool for the job, and here's maybe where it's not. Here's where all of those things that you learned about the rules of a personality type, here's where they break down and they're not applicable. Because every model is going to have rules that don't actually apply to all contexts. And so type is one of those things. And so when we get a wisdom about it, when we can show up with wisdom, that always has to have, as Joel mentioned, an experiential component. It can't be theoretical. It can't be abstract. It has to be lived in order to gain wisdom from the concept. And so how do we do that? How do we become models of wisdom about the system, particularly in a time period of AI where things are going to be tokenized down to data and information like crazy, but particularly information. And it's really important to keep a model like DIKW in mind, because it shows a distinction between, say, having access to Google in your back pocket in your phone, right? Or having access to AI, which gives you data and information, and what knowledge and wisdom actually are, the application and the learning of limitations. Because a person can have AI or Google in their back pocket and assume they have knowledge and wisdom now. Assume that gives them access to the highest order of thinking when it comes to any piece of information. And it's not, it's a totally different thing. So as those of us who have been probably irrationally passionate for decades at this point, we can be models of wisdom. We can show the difference between simply having access to content versus having a lived experience of content, having the understanding the ways in which it can impact us, to give us nourishing meals of understanding ourselves, of quote unquote identity, as opposed to just potato chip snacks of identity, which never feel fulfilling. They never feel like they're actually sating us.
What are potato chips called in England?
Oh, crisps.
Crisps. There you go. I was like, uh-oh, wait, you said potato chips. There's some other word these British folks use.
That's right. That's right. So the crisps of spiritual
There
information.
you go.
All right. So how do we do that? Okay. Well, it means actually honoring your best fit type preferences. All right. And that doesn't mean that you build a life where you only ever do the things that you want to do, but it means building a life that's ergonomic as much as you can, depending on the limitation of your personal, your current experience or your current circumstances, but doing what you can to honor your type preferences, to nourish the parts of yourself that need to be nourished, to set reasonable expectations of yourself as an individual. We've been doing a podcast series called the Self-Love Podcast, where we talk about how knowing your 4 preferred functions gives you a huge leverage point in falling in love with yourself, because you can set reasonable expectations based on where your cognitive functions fall. And the best expectations lead to the highest level of self-confidence and self-love. If you have low expectations for your first 2 functions, you're actually going to get, you're actually going to not feel self-confidence, because you're not pushing yourself as far as you know you can. So you'll start to kind of feel like you're letting yourself off the hook. You'll be disappointed in yourself.
Stymie.
Right, exactly. So setting high expectations for your preferred functions is a way to make sure that you're not disappointed in yourself, that you're doing the best you can. Where at the same time, knowing what your tertiary and inferior functions are, say, that also helps you set reasonable expectations so that you don't become demoralized, that you're not better at those things than you think you should be. So just understanding your cognitive functions helps you first set reasonable expectations, reasonable, right? High expectations for your strengths, reasonable expectations for the things that you struggle with. And all by itself, now you have the wisdom, the lived wisdom of when somebody says, how do you have such a great relationship? Like, you feel so confident, right? How do you get so much self-confidence? You can explain the tool that helped you find that level of self-confidence, that level of reasonable experience of self, not disappointed, not demoralized. So knowing your type preferences and creating a life that honors them, creating a relationship to yourself that honors them, that's a big piece of it.
Yeah.
It's also recognizing that the roots of this is in individuation work, which is becoming our whole self. Again, setting reasonable expectations for your your less preferred functions doesn't mean that you get to not do them ever. It actually means that you now have a map for what is the work of midlife and beyond, right? What are the things that I'm supposed to be integrating into myself? Maybe I've let myself off the hook a little bit too much, and maybe I need to start seeing these aspects of who I am. And as you do this, as a person really connects to these aspects of type, like the true transformative aspects, the true kind of spiritual aspects of this, the more other people see that and want what I'll have what she's having, right? I want what you have. How did you get to that place? And so living it, having an experience of it means that a lot of the communication is actually not going to be articulated. It's not going to be specific words spoken out. There are people who come to us all the time. They're like, I'm the only person in my life that likes type. How do I get everybody else interested in it? And of course, when we have an irrational passion for something, it's hard to transfer that to anybody else. But the answer that I've started to say to people is don't explain type, live it. Don't try to get people interested in the data of it or the information of it. Try to get them interested in what is causing so much change in you, why they may have known a certain version of you before, but now you're so much more self-contained, so much more composed, right? So much more sort of resting into yourself. And the results of that is the thing that's going to pique true interest. And so communicating this to people who are just learning type, who are here because we're having a crisis of identity, right? Because that's where their entry point is. There are ways to give them crisps or snacks of identity, right? Like little tokenizations, little 4-letter words that live on their bio. Or there's a way to provide a nourishing meal of identity, a true understanding that the nourishing meal means, well, it's actually emergent. It's actually something you discover throughout your entire life. It's okay if you don't know everything about yourself right now. That's the joy of it all. That's the original intent. And so living type, not removing the human component of it, is one of the best ways to actually make it contagious. And then finally, I want to read a quote, or unless you had a thing you wanted to say.
I was gonna just to that point. It's less about a label that we take on our personality type and more of a framework that we can live through. It's a support structure for ways to be. It's a framework of being, not a label of identity, right? I mean, even though it helps us with identity, it's not I'm not an ENFP. That's why we say I have ENFP preferences, because I'm not nominalizing, or I'm not making it static. It's a dynamic thing. My preferences make it so I'm attuned to ENFP type things, right? I'm attuned to those behaviors. That's the style I like to learn in, and that's the way I like to make decisions. That's not who I am. I'm Joel. And that's not our identities. It's just a framework of being. And I think that's the important thing, is these labels that we attach to, they calcify it. They make it too rigid. They don't have the dynamic emergent properties that Antonia's talking about, which I'm not the same person tomorrow as I was today. So I need a framework of being that will allow the flexibility of my ever becoming self. And so that's when we get away from tokenization and we're actually in an expression of who we are, using this as the framework for it.
Right. And that's not to say that we're going like type changes all the time, and so don't get over attached to any specific type, and your personality type is going to change. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying like bounce around. Like, I mean, if you're discovering your best fit type, then there's something to be said for trying on a couple beforehand.
Yeah.
But if you feel confident in your type preferences, we're not saying like don't let that become a part of how you see yourself. Well, of course it's part of how you see yourself, especially now, right? And you can't unsee it. That's what's so powerful about it.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is maybe it's less about a static description of self. And maybe this is more like the energies of the world that you're attuned to. Maybe you're pre-wired to be focused on certain kinds of things, but it doesn't tell you the specific things that you're going to be attuned to. Those are things that you get to decide over time. So it's kind of giving a flexibility to all of it. It's giving a way to engage with this framework that doesn't box you in too much, which you all know the dangers of, but also gives enough of a framework so that it's still helpful, right? And so there's a sweet spot of engagement.
Yeah.
All right, was that
That's great.
okay?
Thank you. I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you did. So so we personally feel, and of course we're super biased because we come at this from a personal growth lens, right? That's what we do. We look for people who have, speaking of irrational passions, the intersection of an irrational passion around type and an irrational passion around personal development. Okay. And so that's our sweet spot, because that's the center of the Venn diagram of our irrational passions. And we feel that in order to really to honor its original intent, and then also get the benefits of this model, we know that the way to do what we're talking about is it takes some work. It takes the work of transformation. When I think of the work of transformation, I think of caterpillars that go into a cocoon before they become a butterfly. They liquefy first. Their body liquefies. And I always think, I can't imagine how painful it is to have all of your atoms reorder themselves, right? Like to liquefy. And that's what transformation feels like. This is one of the reasons why the model is so good, is because it gives us something to hold on to while the rest of us is liquefying, right? It gives us like a ballast. It gives us a cocoon with which to grow inside of. And so there's hard work and not a little bit of pain that comes with transformation. But there's also growth, development. We define personal growth as accelerated maturity. And so there's a lot of maturity on the other side, a lot of wisdom that is available. But I think maybe the most powerful human element gift of using type in this way that it can be is that it's the path of true self-acceptance. Like true, not lip service self-acceptance, not I love myself, not daily affirmations or putting like you're a beautiful person on, a bedazzled phone cover or whatever. Like it's the actual real thing. And how do we know if we've gotten to the real thing? Well, I ran into a quote that I absolutely love. Who was said by a person who's like kind of a mix of what is that branch? Anyway, a Jungian analyst and a branch of ancient mysticism. And she was talking about the work that we can do with shadow work.
Sufi?
Yeah, Sufism. Thank you.
There you go. I'm sorry, like rack my
Thank
brain.
you. I was too, but I was like, okay, if I stop everything to try to find that word, we'll be here for 5 minutes. So I'm just gonna.
Sufism.
Thank you. Sufism and Jungian. And she was talking about what this work can do for us, which is self-acceptance. And self-acceptance means that we have to see the whole enchilada, right? In Jung's terms of like of his archetypes, he talks about shadow work, and shadow work is actually available through the Myers-Briggs system, right? We have Dr. John Beebe to thank for bringing in an 8-function model that helps us understand Jung's concept of shadow work, not in a complete way, but in an accessible way. Right. It's not the complete, like our 4 non-used or non-preferred functions aren't our complete shadow, but my goodness, are they such an amazing entry point to start seeing things about ourselves that we might not have accepted before.
Access.
Exactly. And so the quote says, there's a special quality of stillness in a person who encounters the shadow wholeheartedly. Your body may relax in their company because it understands in subtle communications of their presence that nothing is excluded in themselves, therefore nothing can be rejected. Such a person who has given up guarding against the shadow, who has come to wear their scars with dignity, no longer squirms from discomfort or bristles at suffering. They no longer brace in avoidance of conflict. They carry a deep willingness to dance with the inconstancy of life. They've given up distancing as a strategy and made vulnerability their ally. So when we use these models in a psycho-spiritual way, when we use them for transformation, when we use them to become the most of ourselves that we can be in this lifetime, there's a stillness that shows up. And in an agitated world that deals with identity, challenges, that deals with an inability to talk to other people who have opposing thoughts or opinions, when we reject these aspects of ourselves and then they play out in the political sphere and we reject these aspects in others, there's an agitation. There's sort of a chaos energy that does this all the time. So when you run into somebody who is not doing that, that is using these to find a wholeness of self, their stillness is in such contrast to the rest of the chaos of the world that you want what they have, right? Because it's a stillness that you get to benefit from. The stillness is contagious. And so that stillness, that presence of self that's represented in all of this, that's a contagion. That can be just as much of an epidemic as an identity crisis can be. And so that's what we're encouraging, to keep the human aspect while we use AI to help us out in a million different things. And as it becomes ubiquitous and it becomes seamlessly woven into everything we do, and it helps us become more polite, and it helps us ask better questions, and it helps us prompt it in all of these different ways. The one thing that we don't want to do is have it encourage us to think in tokenized ways. And we want to make sure that we keep the humanity of type as a lived experience, as something that we're embodying, not just understanding.
Thank you so much. So I think questions, we can even go a little over the top of the hour if anyone's available for that. We're here to participate with you. If anybody's got some ideas they want to throw out, workshop or talk through, or any questions you have, Catherine, however you want to handle that, I want to open that up for people though.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much, first of all, to Antonia and Joel, and fascinating. And I've got so many little phrases written down. It's really, really, I've loved this. Anyway, what questions might you have or comments? Obviously, it's a new area. We don't have all the answers yet, but the more we debate and discuss these things with each other, the more we'll come up with some questions. And Renee.
Yeah, thank you very much for this presentation. So thought-provoking. And, you needn't have to worry about repeating what Dario said, because I think he presented the T side of it, and he presented a bit more the F side of it. For me, the bit of the worry about AI, and everybody seems to be diving into it and thinking it's the be all and end all and it's going to solve everything. But your word of tokenization made me think that, we're trying to teach robots to become more like humans, but I think instead it's rather doing the opposite. And you said it, Joel, we have to think like robots. And I don't like that, to be honest. And I was wondering because in the 80s, I studied the chaos theory, which is trying to explain how nature works, and it creates lots of random, things of everything, and some survive and some don't. And is that for me, the solution that would keep us human and not become like robots?
I don't know if we have all the answers. I guess I don't, I'm not as familiar with chaos thinking or theory, maybe, to speak to that directly. Do you have some thoughts on it initially?
Yeah, I think that it's going to be inevitable that we sort of merge with technology. Unless we go post-apocalyptic and we don't have any energy anymore or anything that we're doing, I think that's pretty inevitable. And in fact, I think that oftentimes the word is singularity, right? When we merge humans and machines, and everybody's saying that that's inevitable and that sort of thing. But we'll see how it rolls out, right? We'll see. We often know the what, we don't always know the how. That said, when you were talking about how we need to teach it to be more like us. I think the important thing is that as humans, we're so impressionable. It's so easy for us to just sort of shift our thinking, particularly anything that's making our life easier. And I think that one of the big challenges I see, with large language models like ChatGPT-4 and other AI interfaces is it's going to do a lot of our thought labor for us. It's going to be doing a lot of our thinking for us. And if we let it, then our skills, we become unskilled, right? Like those aspects of ourselves sort of atrophy. And so the big challenge in making sure that we don't become too much like it is that we don't hand over too much of our skill development to it, that we maintain our own ability to think through something from beginning to end, to be able to do our own thought labor. And then on top of that is to, and I think the bigger thing to fight, in my opinion, is over virtualizing everything, turning everything to a virtual experience. I think it's incredibly important that we have physical experiences because there's information that gets transferred through a lived experience that you just can't get anywhere else. And so, not allowing ourselves to get over digitalized, over virtualized, having lived experiences, not letting it do our thinking for us, even though that's going to be the first thing that we want it to do. And to make sure that we keep we're always going to have human elements, or at least we're going to for long enough so that, adaptation is not going to just shift us into this new way of thinking. We're humans, what's the phrase? We have godlike technology, Paleolithic emotions, and what's the final one? It's and lizard-like, I can't remember, impulses or whatever.
Yeah.
And we're just going to keep those, right? We're going to have our Paleolithic emotions no matter what. And so we're always going to bring an emotional component to it. That's not going to go away. But is the emotion going to be reactionary? Is it going to be always in reaction to the things around us? Or is it going to be something that we use as part of the tool, like infuse it into everything? And I don't even mean like in a feeler way. I just mean in like a human way. I guess you could say that's kind of a feeler way because the feeling functions are the ones that are most in touch with that. But
I've been thinking about the chaos word you said that she's talking. I'm thinking, you know, there's a little bit of I like being an INFP preferences for you, right, Renee? So this idea of introverted feeling and kind of, no, just because I believe it or I want to, it's like, but that's illogical. It's like, we're going to need some people like us that just are stubborn illogically with an emotional understanding, I think, in some of these worlds, because it's going to be so rational to follow. Well, that just makes sense to do that. And I think there is going to be a wisdom, and it might feel obstructionist to people, like we're resisting, but it's bringing other knowledge in as things get so over digitized. I think people that have, for example, introverted feeling will be very important to make sure it's not super efficient and effective all the time. Like, I think that's going to be a benefit, weirdly enough. Like, it might be our day to shine, Renee, is what I'm trying to say. You know, all the things people get annoyed by us about.
I love it. I'm already thinking when it's going to be Terminator and you're the Connors and, you know, we're going to survive by being irrational because that's the only way we will surprise the machine.
But that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like, there's some beauty to that. And I think it's bringing it to light of maybe what its use has been all along.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Maybe it's just bringing it to light to say, well, maybe introverted feeling helped us not get too efficient all the time, right? It helped us kind of think, well, wait, there's humans here, and make things more specific and not so one size fits all. It's been helping us the whole time, right? And now it's going to even be another use for it that we haven't even considered yet. So
I think we might have a question from Carmel next, and then
Yeah.
Nick, I think. Carmel.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for this really thought-provoking talk, which I totally agree with everything you say about keeping the human sides to it. But I'm just wondering concretely how we can do that. You know, my worry, I guess, is that people will be delegating the exploratory process to the technology. And I think it's already a challenge when people do the MBTI questionnaire and they go through the self-assessment part, and then they find out what came out of the questionnaire. And too often they want to take that as, you know, the truth, rather than thinking if there's a difference between their self-assessed type and what comes out of the questionnaire. Well, what do I think? And, you know, doing that deep thinking. And I guess, you know, if you can just ask ChatGPT to help you at the assessment, people will be a bit lazy. So I'm just wondering how we can kind of control the process a bit.
Yeah.
So one of the programs we teach is called Profiler Training, and that's a way to help somebody find their best fit type from an interview. That we say, if your interview is less than 45 minutes, there's no way you can know, or at least assume you can't. And so one of the things, and we have a student that's working on an AI profiler, right? Like trying to do the exact same thing as our methodology and turning it into AI. And it has been incredibly difficult for him, incredibly, to a point where he's like one of the best coders that I know. And he's just running into challenge after challenge after challenge. And one of the reasons is because really like understanding how a type matches a person, right? Not the person matching the type, but the type matches a person. And there's an art to it, right? There's a lot of elements of their experience that go into sort of understanding how they're cognitively wired. That is more than just like a quick matchup. And so we encourage people, and whether or not somebody comes through a program or not, we always encourage people to make sure that the conversation is the thing, because we discovered that we call it a secondary payoff, but I actually think it might be the primary one, and finding your type is the secondary payoff. In that experience, people feel seen like they never have before. Being interviewed about who you are and what you like and all of these aspects of yourself is, for some people, the first time they've ever felt seen. So we say actually profiling is about seeing a person first and then finding their best fit type preferences second. And so a big piece of, I think, keeping it in is kind of remembering why we're doing it to begin with. We're doing it so that people can feel seen. And like we mentioned, in my opinion, one of the best ways is to model it, right? We model living that way. And then when we talk about it, as opposed to staying with like sort of the concept, the system concepts, making it more about the individual, the person, seeing them as an individual. And so, I mean, the concrete is like, make sure everything's a conversation.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think the other thing that we've been also experimenting with or thinking through and doing some prototyping around is gamification. So I think one of the things that's going to help this survive the over digitalization is bringing it into a tangible gameplay format somehow. So, I mean, like literally like coins and dice and like pieces on a board type things, or card decks, or things that are tangible representations of the system that could be utilized in more of a human way. So I think that's something that people will still engage with. That's my thinking or theory around, what people will want to use. And then I think also we have to also think in terms of what the nature of information is going to be. In a way, you're not going to read Catherine's book, How to Get On with Anyone. You're going to talk to her book. Like when I say talk to, I don't mean necessarily, but your information is going to be less of something we create and then distribute finished. It's going to be almost like a body of work that we engage with and we co-create the answers with alongside of us. It's going to be a whole new way of thinking about how we learn, process information, and develop like our sense of the world. It'll be alongside of us as we go. So we have to also think in terms of, well, what's the best way to have that be? Is if we're I think in terms of like tarot, right? Outside of type for a second, tarot. Does anyone go to a site and just learn about tarot in general? Some people do, super like fans of it. But most people, when they go to a website to look at tarot, they're going because they're with their friend doing a reading, and they're just a casual, user. They're just like somebody it's an interest or a hobby for them. But they need to know how to interpret this thing that they're performing for their friend. And so they get the information in the midst of performing it. The information services the performance of some transaction between humans. It's some engagement between humans. It's not teaching or learning, it's engaging, and the information supports that. So that's where the idea of gameplay and some of this like real world experiential stuff, that's where I see the intersection of knowledge and learning is going to transform into engagement or performance in whatever you would interpret that to be. And that's where the information meets us at that level, or at least that's what I hope, because I think that will preserve it, and it will frame people to think in the application of these things rather than just the knowledge of these things, right? So sorry, I just dumped all that on everybody, but that's kind of the thought process in my head of how I see it.
Thank you, Joel. Let me get to Nick next, and then David.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Long answer, sorry.
Thank you. I was just wondering, so I'm training as a Jungian analyst myself, and I'm really interested in AI. And I was really struck by what you talked about, Joel, about the people seeking meaning in life once AI sort of takes over our jobs. And there's an argument we need more psychotherapy. But just on the personality of the AI engineer or the data scientist, is there anything typology we could do to kind of influence the discussion about AI? And because this might be a bit oversimplistic, but possibly introverted thinking and extroverted thinking is the dominant function for AI engineers. Is there anything, have you thought through that kind of, that challenge with the AI engineers themselves, the data scientists, and then influencing the algorithm, right? Just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
I mean, that's always going to be woven in. Human bias always is. I don't know if you have specific thoughts about like that on a specific or philosophical level.
Well, I will say that our friend who has INTP preferences that we do a lot of conversation with around artificial intelligence development. He's the one working on this, digital profiler or typing online system. We've had a lot of conversations around how the intersection of understanding how large language models like artificial intelligence, if you also have the body of knowledge of Jungian cognitive functions, and you are a person that is training these, and training's not the right word, that's inaccurate if somebody knows about AI, I'm using an inaccurate word, but basically it's training these or tuning them into certain bodies of knowledge, understanding how the functions work in their radical performance. Like you can actually give like qualities to the results based on flavoring them through the thinking that these functions would be in a person. So for example, you could, in a way, attune one of the chat bots or the interfaces to be an INTJ, for example. You're talking to, it takes on the character qualities and it has the cognition, attunement, and looking for the things that an INTJ would be looking for, and making decisions in the way an INTJ would be criteria, looking at the criteria, the decision points like an INTJ would, for example. That's like a real simple expression of how that might look. All the way up to using it to shape how you're looking through an information. You're saying, okay, look through this entire book and then give me 16 different reports on how each type would interpret the material. Oh, wow, that's how an ESTP would interpret that book. Ooh, I better change that a little bit and flavor it this way. That might be like helping us think through how the perspectives of other types. In other words, it can simulate how the mind is working writ large, and probably even more than I can even perceive. That it's going to give us a lot of insight into how it's like how somebody might see this, almost like a Polaroid before you took the real picture. Like, it's going to give us a glimpse into that kind of thing. So I think that's where I think a knowledge of this, maybe obviously there's bias for the people programming it, but I think if somebody understands functions in particular and they have also a mind for programming, I think you have a superpower, probably very bespoke and probably very much unique in the world, because I don't think a lot of the programmers are going to know Jungian concepts or functions, and a lot of Jungian people aren't going to necessarily know computer programming.
Right.
So the intersection of those two at a high proficiency, my goodness, that
Yep.
would really be an interesting. I don't know if that answers your question directly or not, but that's what I'm.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
so thanks for that one, Nick. And David, you've been waiting very patiently. So what would you like to ask?
Oh, well, I'm a computer guy.
Yeah.
Ran a web development company for a decade, and thank God you didn't spend your whole time talking about the same thing that Dario did. I think that you really have hit some really important concepts. But I think the other part of it is I think we're still a lot more aspirational than reality.
Yep.
And the thing that I really want to caution is use Google, right? Use Google, and what are the top answers that are coming back, and why are those answers coming back? I use Google professionally every day, and I use other search engines too, because Google has become almost useless. And if you get onto YouTube, right, you watch a video and it presents you with more videos. And so it plays confirmation bias, right, to the point where it's become a controversy of of Facebook and these other sites actually creating more fractionalization by feeding confirmation bias, because that's what it interprets what people want to have. And so, that old adage, if you're not paying for the service, you're the product. The problem with getting too excited about these tools is what is the agenda that these, and you're kind of talking about generalizing what these programmers are behaving with, but they're being controlled by managers that have other, and we just recently had this huge controversy over Gemini 2, and you couldn't feed into it a picture, you couldn't feed into it a description and get a picture of the subject that you wanted. It would keep changing it on you because the programmers had been instructed to create a model in a certain specific way. The power and the promise, we're using AI every day. Microsoft is including it inside of their products. It's inside of, it's always been inside of Google. But the thing about it is the rule set that you see is not necessarily the rule set that's running underneath of it. But beyond that, there are tasks that AI is going to be delightful in the current time. And one of those things is making programming available to non-programmers, because programming, so much of it is just mindless, nightmarish repetition and trying to hold 30 variables in your head, which that we're not very good at. And that's why programmers almost invariably are youngsters who can use their processing power for that. And as we get older, that's too much of a taxing thing to us. Anyhow, I don't want to go on. Brilliant presentation. I'm so deeply impressed, and that you caught on to this tokenization thing. That's just amazing, because I think Dario was talking about how poorly the model deals with specificity because of its necessarily centered bias. So enough.
Okay, thank you, David, for that contribution. Antonia and Joel, would you like to make any comments on that one? And then after that, I'll stop the recording and happy to stay on for a few more minutes if there are any other questions. But did you want to make any comments on David's contribution there?
Yeah, I just want to agree that it's all very aspirational. It's one of the reasons why I try not to make any like very specific predictions of how it's all going to go down, because again, we know there's like a what that's probably very probable, but how is kind of up for interpretation. Maybe that's just because I'm leading with extroverted intuition, so I don't do that simulation that goes, this is how it's going to work. I go, it could be anything. So so I have a very open frame around all of that. I would say the only thing I would piggyback on is at least for me, I've noticed that to me, these are models that replicate extroverted intuition, patterning in real time, brainstorming in real time, idea generation in real time, trusting that the next word is going to show up, which is basically how extroverted intuition works, right? It's like, I'm just going to talk and I'm just going to trust that the next word is going to be there for me as I lay train tracks of a thought while the train's in motion. So, and that's basically what these LLMs do. And so for me, they're right now, their biggest like help is in replicating extroverted intuition if you need it. And that doesn't mean it's going to be accurate. It doesn't mean that it's going to be trustworthy. It just means that it's going to give you a bunch of patterned ideas. And so so I use it all the time for brainstorming, right? I use it all the time for idea generation. And I think that that's, at least at this time, that's the one thing it has done, is replicate extroverted intuition, which is helpful, right? And like you said, it'll help you write code, it'll help you do all sorts of stuff. So but how, like are we all going to become, you know, sort of post-apocalyptic over it? I don't think so. And when is it going to take our gerbs? Who knows, right? Like if it does. So, and we'll probably have sort of figured some things out by then. So I think it's like basically what you're talking about is having sobriety of thought around it and how it's all going to roll out. And that's one of the reasons why we're like, and in all of it, it doesn't matter how it rolls out. How am I going to live through it, right?
Yeah.
And how I'm going to show up as a person. And the recommendation is like make sure you don't lose the human aspect.
Yeah. So I'll just conclude this, Catherine. Thank you everyone for having us. And this is important that things like BAPT continue.
Yes.
These associations are extremely important. This is a lived knowledge as well as a studied knowledge. And people here are living it a lot, right? People embody it. And it's important. It's important these communities come together. So we want to give our blessing and intentions to everything that's happening here. And thanks so much to Catherine and all the organizers and leadership for inviting us and putting this on, because this is it's a lot of work behind the scenes, and they do a lot volunteer. And it's a lot of gratitude goes toward you, Catherine, and the whole team. Thank you
very much, Joel and Antonia, and thank you for coming along and talking to us. It makes the effort that we put in worthwhile to hear the sort of talk we've just had from you. And I think you've passed on so much of your knowledge and wisdom that it's been a really, really valuable session. So thank you ever so much. And I'll stop the recording there.